Princess in Distress, Book 3, Easter, a mystery novel for children. Chapter 1, in which the story begins for the third time. I'm sure some of you have asked yourselves, hey, what are Anna, Kai, and Louise doing after they solved the case of the week? After all, we already had two of them, one during Christmas and another around the start of Lent. At both times, the holidays had only just begun after we caught the parsonage burglar and the porcelain store intruder. Well, that question has a simple answer. First of all, we spent a lot of time explaining everything to my dad. For example, how we'd lost all of our jackets and pullovers. We'd never managed to find those, even after the water had receded from the lowest playground level. We'd taken them off after getting trapped inside a small hovel, an attempt to escape at least the rising temperatures on the inside. We spent a long time looking for them, but they must have been washed away into the Michel, and were probably clogging someone's drain by now. So yes, the explaining took a lot, and I mean a lot of time, especially since we had to create a few awkward twists in our narrative to avoid snitching on Mr. Full. And then we had to explain that we wanted to replace Mr. Clumpman's missing teapot once again because we wanted to protect Mr. Full. At that point, my dad started giving us very suspicious looks, as if we'd been the one to break into Mr. Clumpman's store window in some destructive burst of nighttime activity. In the end, we managed to convince him of our innocence. In the following, my dad took advantage of his connection within the porcelain industry, so I didn't have to crack my piggy bank and talk to the porcelain princess. A porcelain princess? What's that again? I asked him, even though I'd already heard a little about that particular occupation. Well, my dad started on an explanation of his own that I feared would cover the extent and content of at least 3 school lessons. You see, Michel and its surroundings used to be a hotspot for porcelain manufacture, for centuries in fact. Not 100 years ago, the porcelain industry employed over 1,000 people in the Michel Valley alone. They made everything from decorative porcelain, white porcelain, especially white and blue porcelain with golden ornamentations, to the precious blue porcelain that used to be exported all the way to Russia. After the unification, the porcelain industry lost its relevance, and hundreds of people lost their employment. Nowadays, there's barely 90 people working in the sector. So the people came up with a little advertisement campaign in order to re-establish some of the Michel Valley's porcelain's former relevance, or at least value its nostalgic memory. There's a small group of locals that travel to porcelain fairs all over Germany and present our porcelain. They came up with a porcelain princess to make their stands look a little more colorful and interesting, to lend a bit of sheen and glamour to the advertisement. A new porcelain princess is elected each year. This year the title went to Miss Daumer, who has the most dear little daughter your age called Maria. Oh really? I said, feigning deep hurt even though I'd already heard about Maria. So you don't think me a most dear little daughter my age? Following that, my dad immediately picked me up and assured me that I, too, was the most dear little daughter. Then he called the porcelain princess and asked her if she couldn't scan the next porcelain fair for a pretty coffee or even better a teapot with an elephant motif. And really, even though it happened long after I'd returned back to Redau and only heard a retelling of the story through a phone call, or rather in this case a letter, the porcelain princess found not the same, but another very lovely elephant teapot. My dad, together with Janine, Miss Daum, and her little daughter Maria, went to visit Mr. Clumpman to gift him the newly bought porcelain pot as a replacement for his loss. He, Mr. Clumpman, had been moved to the verge of tears, my dad wrote, especially after he'd heard that I originally wanted to spend all my savings on a compensation for the stolen pot. There was no need for you to do all of this, he had sobbed. Well, I could only hope that Mr. Full's estranged brother would have a similar reaction to Mr. Full's offer of repaying the long overdue inheritance. Yes, I really hoped that his brother would be generous enough and not insist on a repayment so that Mr. Full would be able to keep his little house near the playground. I didn't dare ask my dad any questions on the topic though, mainly because I was afraid he'd find out about Mr. Full's involvement in the case around the porcelain store. Anyway, Mr. Clumpman was happy. My dad even wrote that he'd put up the new elephant pot on a special little podium. At the end of the letter, my dad mentioned that Maria really wanted to meet the 3 of us, and well, I didn't know her, so I didn't know if he wanted to meet her as well. And the Easter holidays were yet to come anyway. I fell sick and battled with a cold and bad fever for several days, missing a lot of school and even being forced to stay home on a weekend that I would have usually spent in Michel. The weekend after it was my dad who had to cancel my bi-weekly visit, because he had 4 different funerals scheduled on a Sunday and a baptism on a Sunday afternoon. To make up for these missed visits, he and my mom came to an agreement that I could stay at my dad's for the entirety of this year's Easter holidays. Ever since she'd gotten a more stable job, she, my mom, didn't mind having us out of her hair a little more frequently than the court had recommended, especially during the holidays. Not that I minded. I liked visiting my dad every 14 days from Friday evenings to Sunday afternoon, but as I'm sure I already mentioned before, it was quite a waste of time and also a waste of gas. Chapter 2, in which I report on the happenings in my school and how it came that Headmaster Lunches decided to abstain from a part of his lunch. That's something we talked about in school, the thing about wasting resources and its consequences. There'd been one science lesson about how especially the people on the northern hemisphere used up a lot of energy, food, and fossil fuels, or rather wasted them, and that people on the other half of the globe had barely anything. All that was extraordinarily unfair, said our teachers. We here in Germany spent our evening watching a funny film on the TV, munching on a bar of chocolate even though we'd already had a plentiful dinner, while the cocoa bean pluckers in Africa or Central America, without whom we wouldn't have any tasty or comforting bars of chocolate, worked under awful conditions for minimal wages. Their lives were neither fun nor comfortable. The story went the same for other products like coffee, tea, or, take notes here, bananas as well.